For 8 years of hard work, Xavier Harris never thought he would leave Vanguard Synergy like this. Holding his box of belongings at 3:45 p.m. on a cold winter day, the 38-year-old single dad wanted to keep his dignity for Brianna. Behind him, in a luxury room overlooking the frozen Chicago River, Audrey Thornton sipped wine and mocked the poor black man ruining his career. After the chairman's daughter stole the promotion he deserved, Xavier decided to start his own consulting company, Horizon Corp. But money traps, betrayal from old friends, and the ruthless Thornton family are waiting to crush him. Can a man, with nothing, make that proud empire fall to its knees and beg for mercy? And that question started just minutes earlier, inside a boardroom he would never forget. At 3:31 p.m., Xavier had stood by the window, packing his last folder into the box. Audrey Thornton leaned against the glass wall, swirling red wine slowly inside a crystal glass. The wine smelled sharp and sweet, mixing strangely with her expensive floral perfume. "A single dad, driving some old car," she said, "and you thought you'd get my promotion?" Her voice was light, almost playful, like she was discussing the weather outside. Xavier said nothing. His jaw tightened once, a muscle flexing hard beneath his skin. He kept folding papers into the box, his hands steady despite the heat rising in his chest. "Rent's due soon, isn't it?" Audrey added, tilting her glass toward the frozen river below. "I bet you'll be begging Vanguard for freelance work by next spring." Xavier lifted the box. It felt heavier than 8 years of loyalty should ever feel. He looked at her once, calm and unreadable, then turned toward the door without a word. That silence unsettled her more than any shouted comeback ever could have. And that question followed Xavier down 23 floors, all the way to the frozen parking garage below. His boots crunched on old salt and gray ice. His breath came out in short, thick clouds. He set the cardboard box on the hood of his Ford Fusion. The metal felt cold through his gloves. Inside the box sat a chipped coffee mug, a photo of his daughter, and a folder of old client notes. He looked up at the tower of glass behind him. Somewhere up there, Audrey was still laughing. His jaw tightened. A vein pulsed once at his temple, then went still. He climbed into the car. The heater rattled, but gave no warmth at all. He drove 17 minutes through slow traffic to his apartment on the south side. The radio played low static, and he didn't bother reaching to change the station. Streetlights flickered past the windshield, painting brief orange stripes across the dashboard. He parked crooked against the curb, too tired to straighten the wheels properly. The hallway smelled like old carpet and someone's dinner 3 doors down. Brianna sat at the kitchen table, 7 years old, swinging her small feet under her chair. A plate of cold pasta sat in front of her, untouched and stiff. "Daddy," she said softly, "are we moving again?" Xavier knelt down. His knees cracked against the worn linoleum floor. He took her small hand in his. Her fingers were cool from the drafty window nearby. "No, baby," he said. "We are not moving. I promise you that." He said it with a steady voice. Inside, his stomach had folded into a tight, hard knot. That night, after Brianna fell asleep, Xavier opened his laptop at the kitchen table. The lamp beside him buzzed faintly, a small yellow light against the dark window. He pulled up his bank account. The number on the screen made his throat go dry. $4,217.83. That was all he had left. 8 years of Vanguard. 8 years of missed dinners and late nights. And this was the number. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. His hand smelled faintly of hand sanitizer from the office. Outside, a city bus groaned past, brakes hissing against the frozen street. Xavier closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the fridge hum. He was a single black father in Chicago, with no family money behind him. No safety net at all. Just a small girl asleep in the next room, and a debt he refused to let touch her. The next morning, at exactly 8:15, his phone rang before he had even poured his coffee. It was Arthur Miller, owner of Miller Freight, a trucking company Xavier had served for 5 years straight. "Xavier," Arthur barked. Your new boss just raised my rates 15% and cut my support team. Xavier's grip on the phone tightened. His knuckles turned pale against the plastic case. 3 of my steel shipments are stuck at the port right now, Arthur said. Every hour costs me money. Through the phone, Xavier heard forklifts beeping somewhere behind Arthur, sharp and repetitive. 15 years I've done business with your company, Arthur said, voice cracking with frustration. Now, some kid who's never touched a loading dock is running my account into the ground. Xavier pressed the phone tighter to his ear, staring at frost creeping across his window. Xavier listened, jaw set, saying little. He already knew whose signature was on that new policy. Audrey Thornton had gutted the support staff to cut costs and impress the board fast. She did not know these clients. She did not know their names, their routes, or their kids' birthdays. Xavier did. He had built those relationships one phone call at a time, for years. After the call ended, Xavier stood by the window, coffee going cold in his hand. He thought of Arthur, and he thought of a dozen other clients just like him. All of them loyal, all of them now being treated like numbers on a spreadsheet. Something shifted quietly behind Xavier's ribs. Not anger exactly, something steadier than that. A decision was forming, slow and solid, like ice thickening across a still pond. Maybe it was time to build something of his own. Something no one could take from him. But fear crept in fast, cold and heavy, right behind that spark of hope. That evening, Xavier spread his bills across the table like a losing hand of cards. Brianna's asthma medicine and speech therapy came to $450 every single month. Rent was due on the 5th, $2,840, due in 11 days. He opened a job listing for a sales role at a small packaging company nearby. $45,000 a year. Steady, boring, safe enough to keep the lights on. He filled out half the application. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unmoving. Could a black single father really risk everything on some improving company of his own? What if he failed? What if Brianna went without because of his own stubborn pride? He stared at that half-finished form for nearly 3 hours, the apartment silent around him. Somewhere down the hall, a pipe ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the dark. He did not send the application. He did not delete it either. Not yet. 2 days later, desperate for clarity, Xavier walked into Vance's Cuts on the south side. The shop smelled like clean aftershave and old vinyl seats, warm against the freezing afternoon. Marcus Vance, 72 years old, ran clippers along Xavier's neck with a slow, steady hand. Marcus had built a small real estate portfolio himself, years ago, starting with nothing at all. Vanguard never bought your talent, Xavier, Marcus said, voice low and rough like gravel. They just bought your time. Your clients trust you, not some shiny logo on a building. The old radio in the corner played soft blues, crackling faintly through a worn speaker. Another customer near the door laughed at something, the sound bouncing off the tiled floor. You built Vanguard's whole client list with your own 2 hands, Marcus continued, clippers buzzing softly. Don't let some girl with a fancy title convince you. That work wasn't worth anything. Xavier's eyes met his own reflection in the mirror. His face looked tired but focused now. Marcus disappeared into the back room. He returned holding a cracked leather notebook, worn soft with age. Inside were names, phone numbers, dozens of independent business owners across Illinois who despised big corporate red tape. Build a roof nobody can kick you out from under, Marcus said, pressing the notebook into his hands. Xavier ran his thumb across the notebook's frayed edge. The leather felt warm from Marcus's own hands. Something in his chest finally loosened, just slightly, like a held breath let go. He walked out of that shop a different man than the one who walked in. That same night, Xavier deleted the packaging company application without a second thought. He filed the paperwork for Horizon Core Consulting the very next morning at 9 o'clock sharp. With what little money remained, he rented a windowless basement office on 79th Street. 1,400 square feet, the landlord had said. In truth, it barely reached 600. The rent was $400 a month. The walls were the color of old ash. Xavier painted them himself. One weekend, rollers squeaking against dry, cracked plaster. He found a used wooden desk from Marcus's storage room, one leg slightly shorter than the rest. In the corner, he set up a small cot in case Brianna needed to nap during late nights. At 9 o'clock that Monday morning, he signed his very first contract with Miller Freight. The fee was small. The relief on Arthur's face, however, was enormous. Xavier had crossed a line now. There was no walking back across it. Word moved quietly through Marcus's old network. Small business owners started calling, one after another. But not everyone welcomed him. Word of his new company reached Vanguard within 11 days. Audrey Thornton's face went red when she heard the name Horizon Corps mentioned in a meeting. Her fingers curled around her pen, so tightly her knuckles turned white against the desk. She picked up her phone and made calls of her own, cold and quick. She pressured local tech vendors across Chicago, warning them not to work with Xavier's company. She slashed Vanguard's prices to a painful loss, just to starve his young company out. Around that same time, Sarah Jenkins knocked on the door of Xavier's basement office. Sarah had been Vanguard's chief accountant until she refused to fake a financial report. Audrey had asked her to hide a $1.2 million shortfall in the quarterly numbers. Sarah had said no. 2 days later, security walked her out of the building. She carried her belongings in a plastic grocery bag, her ID badge cut in half. Her coworkers watched silently, none of them daring to say goodbye out loud. "I know where all their numbers live," Sarah told Xavier, setting her bag down firmly. Xavier studied her face. Tired but sharp. Exactly the kind of ally he needed. He nodded once. "Then let's put those numbers to work," he said quietly. Their first real test came from Preston Steel, a mid-sized distributor Vanguard refused to lose. Audrey personally offered Preston a 40% discount, a number designed purely to crush Xavier. Inside the tiny basement office, the space heater rattled weakly against the winter cold. Sarah spread shipping records across the desk, pages curling slightly from the dry heat. The smell of burnt coffee filled the room, mixing with fresh paint still drying on the walls. Xavier traced his finger along a map of delivery routes, searching for something Vanguard had missed. Xavier and Sarah worked 48 straight hours, fueled by gas station coffee and stubborn hope. Sarah's eyes were red and heavy by the second night, but she refused to stop working. Around 2 a.m., she suddenly sat up straight, pointing hard at one crossed-out route. They found a hidden flaw buried deep in Preston's old shipping routes, one nobody had noticed. By fixing that single route, they could save Preston $125,000 a year. Real savings, not a fake discount built to disappear the moment the contract was signed. Preston's owner leaned back in his chair, reading the numbers twice before speaking again. "You didn't just underbid them," he said slowly. "You actually solved my problem." He signed with Horizon Corps that same afternoon, ink still wet on the page. Outside his office window, a delivery truck rumbled past, engine rattling in the cold air. Xavier shook Preston's hand firmly, feeling the calluses of a man who worked with his own hands. Word of the Preston Steel deal spread quietly through Marcus's old network of contacts. A bakery owner called first, asking about delivery routes for his flour shipments. Then a small furniture maker called, worried about late payments from his own distributor. Xavier answered every call himself, notepad open, pen scratching steady notes across the page. Sarah handled the numbers late, into the evenings, spreadsheets glowing on her laptop screen. Slowly, the basement office filled with the smell of fresh coffee and printer ink. A small bell above the door jingled each time another visitor stepped inside. Xavier kept a running list of names taped beside his desk, growing longer every week. Xavier drove home, that night with the radio off, just listening to his own thoughts. Small wins were stacking, one on top of another, like bricks forming a wall. But somewhere behind him, in that glass tower downtown, Audrey was already plotting something far darker. Vanguard's finances were cracking under her reckless discounts, though she refused to admit it aloud. To cover the growing losses, she chased one final prize: Jonathan Thorne, a logistics giant. His contract alone was worth $14 million, enough to hide every mistake she'd made. She learned Xavier was courting Thorne too, and something cold snapped behind her eyes. She paid off a former employee of Xavier's, offering cash for one simple, ugly favor. That employee slipped a USB drive into Xavier's office computer, loaded with stolen Vanguard files. It was a trap, built quietly, meant to bury Xavier under a fake scandal. On a freezing Tuesday morning, at exactly 11:30, two police officers walked into his office. The basement door creaked open, letting in a blast of icy air and swirling snow. A Vanguard lawyer stood behind them, arms crossed, wearing a small, satisfied smile. Xavier's heartbeat thudded hard in his ears, drowning out the officer's first few words. His hands felt suddenly cold, colder than the winter air pouring through the open door. They seized his computer. They found the planted USB drive exactly where it had been hidden. The lawyer's shoes clicked sharply against the concrete floor as he stepped closer, smiling wider. "Corporate espionage is a serious charge," he said, voice smooth and utterly without warmth. Xavier watched an officer unplug his monitor, the cord snapping loose from the wall. Horizon Corps' business license was suspended, pending a full criminal investigation into corporate espionage. Brianna screamed when she saw the officers, her small hands gripping Xavier's coat sleeved tightly. His meeting with Jonathan Thorne, scheduled for that very afternoon, was canceled within the hour. Xavier stood outside in falling snow, $14.50 left in his wallet. He sat in his cold car, holding his shaking daughter close against his chest. The heater still didn't work. Neither one of them moved for a long, long time. Snowflakes melted slowly on the windshield, sliding down in thin, silver lines. Somewhere far off, a train horn echoed low across the frozen city skyline. Was he wrong to fight for his own dignity against people with so much more? Had his pride cost his daughter everything, just when she needed him steady the most? Later that night, back home, Brianna curled against his side on the old couch. "Are you in trouble, Daddy?" she whispered, her small voice muffled against his sleeve. Xavier stroked her hair slowly, feeling her breathing slow beneath his arm. "No trouble I can't handle," he said softly, though his own chest still felt tight. She fell asleep first. Xavier stayed awake, staring at the ceiling for a long while. The refrigerator hummed steadily in the kitchen, the only sound in the quiet apartment. He closed his eyes. He did not have an answer. Not yet. But 80 miles away, at that exact hour, Sarah Jenkins refused to stop working. She still had legal backup copies of Vanguard's internal server logs from her old job. Her small apartment kitchen smelled like burnt toast and cold, forgotten tea. The laptop screen glowed blue against her tired face as lines of code scrolled past. Her fingers moved fast across the keyboard, tapping out commands late into the night. Late that night, she found something buried deep inside the file metadata itself. Every file on that stolen USB traced back to one single administrator account. That account belonged to Audrey Thornton, personally logged in from her own office computer. The files had been created at 9:15 on a quiet Sunday night, 9 days earlier. Sarah stared at the screen, her hands trembling slightly over the keyboard. Outside her window, a distant siren wailed and faded into the quiet night. "Xavier," she said, calling him at midnight. "I found it. I found everything." The next morning, Xavier drove straight to Jonathan Thorne's private estate outside the city. Thorne's office smelled like leather and old cigar smoke, quiet except for a ticking clock. He laid the evidence on Thorne's desk, without a single word of anger or accusation. Thorne read through the documents slowly, his face hardening with every passing page. His fingers tapped once against the desk, a slow, deliberate sound in the still room. He saw a man who had been framed. He saw a woman who had framed him. I don't do business with liars, Thorne said finally, sliding the papers back across the desk. He ended every negotiation with Vanguard Synergy that same afternoon without looking back once. Then he signed a long-term, exclusive contract with Horizon Core worth $14 million. Xavier shook his hand, steady and calm, though his own heart pounded hard beneath his shirt. That night, Xavier sat with Brianna at their small kitchen table, sharing a warm pizza. The cheese was still melting, stretching in long strings between the box and their plates. She told him about her school project, drawing a bright yellow sun across the paper. Her crayon squeaked softly against the paper, tongue poking out in fierce concentration. He listened closely, laughing at her jokes, letting the weight of the day slip away for a moment. Later, after she fell asleep, he stood by the window, watching snow fall softly outside. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders felt loose instead of tight and aching. Word of Thorne's decision spread through Chicago's business circles faster than anyone expected. Inside Vanguard's tower, Audrey sat alone in her office, staring at falling stock numbers. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through email after email, each one worse than the last. The security cameras she had proudly installed months earlier now recorded her own panic pacing. Those same cameras, approved under her signature, would later capture every desperate decision she made. Vanguard Synergy, without that contract, slid straight into a dangerous financial freefall. Nervous lenders began pulling their money out, one after another, like dominoes falling in sequence. But Reginald Thornton, Audrey's powerful father, refused to accept defeat quietly. He used his money and his political connections to drag Horizon Core into court. He claimed a stolen intellectual property dispute, hoping to freeze Thorne's new payment entirely. News of the lawsuit reached Marcus's barbershop within days, spreading quietly from chair to chair. Arthur Miller called to offer help, his voice rough but full of loyalty. "You saved my company," Arthur said. "Let me help save yours however I can." Small business owners across the network began sending letters supporting Horizon Core's reputation and honesty. Xavier read each letter at his kitchen table, throat tightening slightly, with quiet gratitude. He stacked them neatly in a drawer, promising himself he would keep every single one. Xavier now faced a long, expensive legal fight on top of everything else piling up. Every new dollar earned went straight toward lawyers instead of growing his young company. Court hearings dragged through gray January afternoons, filled with paperwork and cold coffee. Reginald's lawyers spoke in long, tangled sentences, hoping to bury Xavier in confusion. Xavier sat through each hearing quietly, hands folded, refusing to let frustration show on his face. The courtroom smelled of old wood polish and stale coffee from a machine down the hall. A ceiling fan clicked overhead, spinning slowly through the stuffy winter air. Still, he worked through the nights, making sure Thorne's shipments never missed a single beat. Sarah worked beside him, eyes red from exhaustion, refusing to slow down even once. Then, 3 weeks later, everything shifted at once, faster than either of them expected. Midwest Trust, the bank holding Vanguard's largest debt, gave them a brutal ultimatum. Pay $8,400,000 within 24 hours or lose everything completely. Reginald Thornton, humiliated and desperate, walked into Xavier's small basement office on 79th Street. The desk still had one uneven leg. The wall still smelled faintly of old paint. Reginald's coat still carried the cold from outside, snowflakes melting slowly on his shoulders. He glanced around the small basement office, clearly uncomfortable in such a modest space. The desk lamp buzzed faintly between them, casting a thin yellow light across the papers. "Name your price," Reginald said, voice strained, sitting stiffly across the narrow desk. His fingers drummed once against his knee, betraying nerves his voice tried to hide. Reginald offered him everything. Full executive vice president, $1.2 million a year, 10% ownership of Vanguard Synergy itself, if Xavier would only bring Thorne's contract back. The space heater hummed quietly in the corner, the only sound between them for a moment. Xavier sat quietly, hands folded on the desk, listening without a single flicker of excitement. Then he slid a thick folder across the table, calm as still water. Reginald opened it, his fingers suddenly unsteady against the paper's edge. Inside was proof that Horizon Core, backed by Jonathan Thorne's financial guarantee, had already acted. At 10:45 that very morning, Horizon Core had purchased Vanguard's entire $8 million debt. Reginald's face drained of color, pale as the snow outside the window. Xavier was no longer an employee begging for a title. He was a new owner. "You don't work for me anymore," Xavier said softly. "I believe it's the other way around now." Silence filled the small office. Somewhere, an old radiator ticked once against the quiet. Reginald opened his mouth, then closed it again, finding no words left to offer. 1 week later, Xavier walked into Vanguard's luxury boardroom as its new chairman of the board. The same glass windows overlooked the same frozen river he had once stared at, defeated. This time, he did not carry a cardboard box. He carried a single leather folder. The same crystal glasses from months earlier sat empty on the polished wooden table. Outside, the frozen river looked exactly the same as it had that cold December afternoon. Reginald sat across from him. Audrey sat beside her father, staring down at the table. Her fingers picked nervously at the edge of a folder, tapping a soft, uneven rhythm. Her face had gone pale, her earlier confidence nowhere to be found in the room. Xavier did not raise his voice. He did not gloat or throw old insults back. "You'll both keep a small, non-voting share," he said calmly, "and report directly to me." Audrey's jaw tightened. Her throat worked once, but no sound came out at all. Sarah stood quietly near the door, arms crossed, watching the scene with tired satisfaction. Xavier immediately reinstated Sarah Jenkins as chief accountant, with full back pay included. He rehired every honest employee Audrey had fired, without real cause, over those past months. That afternoon, he left the office early, something he had rarely allowed himself before. He picked up Brianna from school, her small backpack bouncing against her shoulders. He drove her to a top elementary school across the city, one he had just enrolled her in. Brianna looked up at the tall brick building, eyes wide with quiet wonder. The building smelled faintly of fresh paint and warm bread from a nearby cafeteria. Somewhere inside, children's laughter echoed down a bright hallway lined with colorful art. "Is this ours now, Daddy?" she asked, gripping his hand a little tighter. Xavier smiled, the first easy smile he had allowed himself in many long months. "No, baby," he said. "This is yours. You earned every bit of it, too." She squeezed his hand once, then let go, running ahead toward the front doors. Her backpack bounced, with each step, small sneakers slapping against the clean tile floor. A teacher at the entrance waved warmly, kneeling down to greet her by name. Xavier stood there a moment, watching her small figure grow smaller against the entrance. The cold morning air felt different now, lighter somehow, easier to breathe in fully. He thought of a cardboard box. He thought of $4,217. He thought of a cold car with a broken heater and a girl who never stopped believing in him. He thought of Marcus's worn notebook and Sarah's tired eyes glowing blue in the dark. He thought of Arthur's angry phone call and the small letters that arrived every week. Each memory sat quietly in his chest now, no longer heavy, just steady and warm. None of it had broken him. All of it had built something no one could ever take away. Dignity, he realized, was never about the title on a door or the number in a bank account. It was about staying steady when everything around you tried to knock you down. The wind picked up gently outside, carrying the smell of fresh snow through the quiet street. He turned back toward his car, already thinking about picking Brianna up that afternoon. And for the first time in a very long while, Xavier Harris finally felt at peace.